Hi, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to Affirm Your Gender, Affirm Your Life, our global celebration of Trans Day of Visibility. We have internal guests from Accenture, and we also have external guests of Accenture here, and people from all over the world. Today, our speakers include AJ Fernandez Rivera, a managing director who's in Accenture Canada, Sarah Weaver, a master technology architect in Accenture Australia, Rika Paris, a solution architect, solution manager in Accenture UK, Beck Bailey, a new joiner to Accenture USA, and myself, James Jurgensen, and I'll be your moderator today. During this session together, we aim to highlight the diverse intersectional experiences of people within the transgender community. We're going to showcase Accenture's commitment to LGBTQI, the alphabet soup commitment, basically, especially to the transgender community. And we're going to lead an open and honest conversation to advance a culture of equality. We'll be sharing personal stories. We're going to talk about overcoming different circumstances, and we're going to give you some teachable points of view so that you can take home some lessons and go into your communities and take action. I just want to remind everybody about our core principle of the respect for the individual. We're all going to maintain a high level of respect for everyone during this call. And if you have questions, you can add them in the chat box. We'll be sure to choose some questions for later on. To get you all started, I'd first like to introduce you to Sarah. She's a master technology architect, like I said. And while she says she's still finding her feet and her voice as an advocate for the transgender community, I already deeply admire the work that she's done. Sarah, I'd like to now turn it over to you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your story and who you are?
Thank you, James. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I am an associate director. I am a master technology architect, but more importantly, and the largest thing in my life at the moment, is I'm a transgender woman. I started this part of my journey and this part of my life about 15 months ago when I came out very selectively to some trusted friends and colleagues. I had a bit of turmoil in my life at the time, and it took me a while to find a support network. There were times there for a number of months where I felt very alone. Around the middle of last year, I met some of the other panelists. I met you as well, James, and over a late night conversation, I came to realize that by being visible in my journey, because I've spent so much of my life establishing a career and establishing who I am as a person, I was able to come out as transgender in Accenture. I was able to stand up and be public and be visible and act as a role model to a lot of other people who don't have or didn't have the privilege and position that I have. What that's meant for me is making a conscious decision to talk about my journey and to talk about my experiences, which is something I never imagined that I would be doing. But I have discovered that it's probably one of the most rewarding opportunities that I've had. And I've found the most amazing supportive organization in Accenture to help me find my feet as an advocate, as I describe it, and to make a difference in people's lives. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. Yeah, I like what you brought up about community. I definitely relate to that. It's so important for that coming out process and for finding your voice as an advocate. And someone who else is on the call who really reminds me of someone who forges community and maintains community, especially for us here in Accenture who are trans, is Rika, who I'd like to now introduce you all to. She's a solution architect, senior manager, and a fervent advocate for the trans community, with advocacy inside of Accenture, doing things like leading the global trans support group, as well as her leadership externally in Accenture, leading several transgender organizations. She's also the first transgender housemate a Pinoy Big Brother. So lots of things that are very complimentary to Rika, but I'll now turn it over to her for her to tell you all a little bit more about herself.
Yes, thank you, James. And hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy International Transgender Day of Visibility. So I guess my story is quite different because I joined Accenture 7 years ago and I was hired as an external hire, essentially an experienced hire. And prior to coming to Accenture, I already have like a public persona, actually very public in the sense that I think people recognize me in television in back in the Philippines. So just the background of that, I was the chairwoman of Society of Transsexual Women of the Philippines, or STRAP organization back then. And what we do is we do a lot of advocacy as well as education work. And I think being, I guess, I think doing a lot of things with that, it landed me on TV to do that education on a national scale. I was the first transgender housemate at that time, and I think it was very important to do the education. So I managed to introduce the term transgender in our national TV, clarify what it is, use it correctly, and I think most importantly to give a very positive image of what transgender person is, that we are not just confined to a particular industry or a particular image, or we are portrayed in a caricature manner, but we are living, breathing people with, I think, a good background as well. And I wanted to show that different side of being transgender. And prior to coming to Accenture, I already have that public persona, as I said. So when I did apply to Accenture, the senior managing director who interviewed me at the time, Junjun, has at least recognized me, and I guess some people around the building has recognized me as I went through as well. And I think I had a really positive experience in the sense that Junjun was telling me about how great the Pride Network in Accenture is, how policies and the different, I think, culture that we have in Accenture. And I think even Junjun introduced me, told AJ directly that he hired a transgender woman. And that's how I got to know AJ and Bob, who leads the ASEAN LGBT network back then. And fast forward, I'm here now in the global IND space of Accenture. And I think I am very happy that there is a space that I'm able to do what I love externally in Accenture, but at the same time, I'm able to do my advocacy and education in Accenture. And I still kind of like have the public persona. I did some kind of TV work, but I was a bad actress, so hence I'm in IT. Yes. Yeah, that's it for me, James.
Thanks, Rika. Yeah, I definitely see what you mean about how it's great when we can do advocacy work inside of Accenture and outside of it, and really the importance of networks connecting us to the right people, and also people who see us as like fully human. And so that actually reminds me of the next speaker who I'd like to introduce, Beck Bailey, because while he is now coming to Accenture and is going to be a managing director at Accenture, I actually reached out to him before I knew he was coming to Accenture because of how strong his advocacy has been for the transgender community. And he was just someone I wanted to learn from and get connected with as the Workplace Equality Program Director at the Human Rights Campaign. So that's really just a testament to all of the great work he's done and how lucky we're going to be to have him here at Accenture. Beck, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, James. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone on the line. I am so excited to be here today with Sarah and Rika and AJ and James and all of you to take a moment to recognize Transgender Day of Visibility. As James said, I am just about to join Accenture. My first day is April 7th, so get ready. You're going to see more of me pretty soon. But most recently, I have been the director of the Workplace Equality Program at the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization in the United States. And we do a lot of work around the globe as well. And, you know, I came into my advocacy, I think, in a very natural way. You know, I started my career in the 80s in a Fortune company. And at that time, I was an out lesbian, but I went back into the closet to take that job and work. I worked in a factory in South Carolina, and I was really excited about the company and the job, but it was really hard to be in the closet. And I think, you know, pretty much from that moment to the time I ended up at HRC in some ways was a journey to find a place where I could be openly myself. And of course, a few things transitioned along the way, including me, in terms of coming out as transgender. And when I think about that moment, I'm thinking a little bit about what Rika said in terms of visible role models, or, you know, people who were on TV, or the presentations of transgender people in society. And, you know, I can kind of think, at least from my perspective, that the only time I ever saw a transgender person, it was usually a transgender woman, and it was usually a character on like Law and Order SVU who was being interviewed by the police over a dead body in an alley or something, right? Like, it was never a positive representation. There were very few trans masculine presentations, and I think because of that, it was very hard for me to even know and understand myself. And things that changed along the way were, you know, the internet and the arrival of like chat rooms and places where transgender people gathered and shared you know, their stories with each other and empowered each other to be able to understand themselves and also go through their own journey and their own travel to visibility. And that's what happened for me. And, you know, at some point, I had this opportunity. I had been doing a lot of consulting with companies as an independent person, independent consultant, and I was being asked a lot to talk about transgender inclusion because I had been very open about my status, and this was about 10 years ago or so. And through that journey, I got a chance to work for HRC, and now I work with you know, major companies around the globe on being more trans inclusive specifically, and LGBTQ inclusive more broadly. And Accenture is one of those companies, and I've had the pleasure of working with folks there for many years. I admire the company so much, I'm coming to join it. So that should tell you something. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of the conversation today. So I'll throw it back over to James, and we can get on with the program.
Thanks, Beck. What you said about representation and how that really helps you forge community and also like find your own voice and work through your own identity. I think the ultimate testament to that might be how excited I got when I found out you were coming, because I think a lot of people might not realize this, but to my knowledge, we've never had a out transmasculine managing director, or I'm not sure how many leadership levels below that. So you being here really like made me realize how much representation does feel good to have. So I just can't wait till you get here. And absolutely not last, last but absolutely not least, we have another speaker I'd like to introduce you all to, AJ, who is a managing director in Accenture Canada. AJ identifies as a transgender woman and is a staunch advocate of inclusion and diversity across the board, but obviously particularly with the trans community. She set up and led the very first LGBTQ organization in Accenture Asia Pacific region in 2006. And AJ, I'd really love to hear you talk a little bit more about yourself and the legacy that you've left by setting up that organization in Asia Pacific region.
Thanks, James. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so my name's AJ Fernandez Rivera. Thanks for having us here to celebrate International Transgender Day of Visibility. Let me tell you more about my career in Accenture, and I'll tell you more about what your question around how I set up the organization. So I've been with the firm for 20 years, more than 20 years. I'm going 24 years. So I'm a lifer, as they say. I think my story is a little bit like Beck. I was a very out, feminine gay boy when I joined the firm. And it's only fairly recent that I actually merged my personal and my professional life when I became one of the leaders in Accenture and really just came out as a transgender woman. I'm part of our Accenture technology practice. Technology is my passion. I like helping our clients solve their business problems through technology.
AJ, I think you might have gone on mute.
Oh, sorry.
I want to make sure we're hearing every great word you're saying.
Okay. Aside from the work that I'm passionate about, I'm also, as you said, staunch advocate of diversity and inclusion. So I'm the Canada Pride lead. I'm also the technology diversity and inclusion lead. So in my time in Accenture, more than 2 decades, and a lot of people within the firm can relate, it is a different firm before as a private firm. And I think I felt more and more comfortable. So I have my ups and downs in my career, all through that time. And I think I felt more and more comfortable when we became a public company, because something clicked in my head like a light bulb moment. So when you're a public company, you have a responsibility to your shareholders and you have a reputation to keep. And part of that is how you take care of your people. So then I was very passionate about pushing for diversity and inclusion. I worked with a lot of our global leads then to just lay out the red carpet for future joiners or existing employees in Accenture. And we can tell about, when I say my ups and downs, there were moments when I did feel like I didn't belong in the firm. And you're in a crossroad whether you continue or you quit. And I part of that light bulb moment was one of my mentors, the partner who actually hired me, mentioned, well, if you quit Accenture and you go and join the same industry, you will face exactly the same challenges. Or you can stay in Accenture and help us change the culture. So I made a decision to stay, and that's why I mentioned, because it's the importance of having mentors, especially in the leadership position. And I asked her for support, and I stay, and I cannot do this change on my own. And I need the support, and she has always been very supportive. Her name was Rita Cruz. she was the one who hired me, and then the country managing director then in the Philippines, Beth Louie, was also very supportive. So we launched the first organization in Asia Pacific. Now, don't consider that as a legend yet, because the work is not done. There's a lot of things we can do globally. In my time in the firm, I've worked in many of our offices in the US, in Asia Pacific, of course, in the UK, and here in Canada. So I've always been close to influencing that culture. And I think, having you and Eureka mention when she was hired, I was so proud that we did that. And having you, James, in the call, seeing the future generation, it warms my heart. So thank you for having me here. I'm proud to be here with Sarah, Rika, James, and Beck. Welcome to Accenture. Happy that you're joining as one of our managing director soon. And thank you to those of you who are here, who dialed in, and your support for listening to our stories. That means a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, AJ. I cannot agree with you more when you're talking about, I think we have a slight echo, if everybody can unmute. Thanks. I cannot agree with you more about the necessity to change the culture sometimes, but then also how there's a moment of hesitation, of there's also probably a reason that it is the way that it is, in the sense that it's difficult to change up the culture that requires somebody saying, maybe we could do this a different way. And so I really applaud the courage that you've had, and then also the perseverance that you've had in those efforts, because yes, at the forefront, it does take courage to even get started, but then it takes a lot of time and energy, as you know, to keep going with that, pushing that culture change. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for all of our speakers on the call who are continually doing that. And for everybody else who's on the call with us, you know, that mentorship role that AJ mentioned, or just the supportive role, that's a role you could play. Is, okay, so this is the cultural change we're trying to lead. Tell me how I can help, because there's definitely a way that everybody could help move this forward. Speaking of how our experiences come out to be and changing culture, you know, a big part of what a lot of us talk about in the trans community in relation to visibility is how our status as a trans person and our perception of, you'll hear the term passing, but how you're read in terms of your gender, how people perceive you, how that can shape your experience. So I'd like to hear all of y'all talk about a little bit about how you've been perceived and how your status as a trans person has shaped your experience, and whether that's been increasing things like male privilege or decreasing it, or different ways that that's shown up in your life. Beck, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Sarah and to the rest of the speakers as well.
Wow, I love this question, because I think it's something that transgender and non-binary people think about a lot, and people who are not transgender, people who are cisgender, maybe haven't spent as much time with certain aspects of this. And I'll start with, you know, being someone who, prior to, you know, coming out as trans and, you know, medically transitioning and physically transitioning, I was always a very masculine lesbian. Like masculinity has been my gig as far as I can remember. And, you know, I kind of always knew who I was and was on a journey to becoming me, right? And in that, you know, kind of that time that I walked around the earth as a very masculine, but still readable person in a woman's body, that, you know, in that way is a time of my life where I received a lot of attention that I didn't want, right? People, you know, doing double takes and, you know, hearing whispers, is that a man or a woman? You know, all kinds of what we call policing of gender or surveillance of gender. And it's, you know, generally not wanted, and also generally a negative kind of attention that, you know, doesn't feel good. And certainly people who bend gender norms, you know, all through society have faced that kind of scrutiny. So, you know, imagine, you know, any woman, cisgender or transgender, any man, any person of any sexual orientation who pushes the envelope of what societal norms are in whatever society they're in, right? Because that changes as we go around the globe as well. And, you know, you're going to get that kind of, you know, societal pushback on who you are. One of the things about, you know, transitioning, and for people who pass, which, you know, for me, that definition is, you know, when people meet me, they assume that I was born and assigned male at birth and raised as a boy, and, you know, they imagine my experience that way. I pass, not all trans folks pass, nor do they want to, right? Some people don't want to. And some people who want to can't for lots of reasons. And so when I think about my experience, when I moved from someone who was not passing to passing, probably one of the biggest changes for me was a new depth of understanding of male privilege. Now, I'm not going to say that I didn't understand it before. I think anybody who was assigned female at birth and grew up as a girl and raised as a young woman probably understands sexism in our contemporary society. But the kind of visceral understanding of what it's like to be a white man in business is something that really hit me when I started passing. And it doesn't change even in the most enlightened spaces. So for example, I experienced all kind of privilege when I first started working at HRC, which is a civil rights organization, even among my own colleagues there. And what that points to is just the depth of unconscious bias and how it drives our interactions with each other on a daily basis. And I'll give you one example and open it up to the group. When I first started working at HRC, I worked for a woman who was much younger than me, much shorter than me, and very youthful appearing. And we would go in meetings together, and she was my boss, and everybody would talk to me. And I don't mean outside of HRC, I mean even inside of HRC, people would just defer all their questions and commentary to me, and I would be like, well, wait, she's my boss, she's the expert, you should be looking at her, right? And so that's that visceral understanding of that really hit me when I started passing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely hear you there, and I love the way that you explained passing, and in terms of not everybody passes, not everybody wants to pass. For me, that's something I can really relate to, coming out as trans-masculine and non-binary, is that it's odd how you can oftentimes, at least for me, I can't even tell when I'm being read a certain way until, some of those unconscious bias manifests, and you're like, is this happening because you're perceiving me as this gender? I'm not sure, because we're not talking about it explicitly. So sometimes it's even unclear how you're being read. And it is also interesting the way it illuminates those unconscious biases. I definitely understand that example that you're giving, because I've seen it in certain situations where I've also been read as a cis man, and then, something will come up, and a lot of times I intentionally point out my transness, because I'm like, I don't know if what you're thinking is my actual life experience, that's not a representation of me. But then there's things also like, I noticed that when I was perceived as a woman, I was seen as like someone who very much spoke their mind with a lot of conviction. And then as people started perceiving me as masculine, people were like, you're so quiet, you barely speak up. I'm like, I really don't think my behavior changed. I think your perception of it and how you encode it if you think a man or a woman is speaking up. So I thank you for sharing those examples and that great explanation. Sarah, I'd like to hear what you think about this. How is the things that Beck raised and that I raised, how does that compare to your experience?
Yeah, thanks, James. It's an incredibly interesting dichotomy that we're talking about here. For so much of my life, I experienced that white privilege, that white male privilege that Beck was referring to, and I knew, and I've known all my life that something wasn't quite right, and I finally got to the point where I can recognize and act on that. And for a long time there, I felt a certain amount of imposter syndrome in terms of my presented identity. But what I've found fascinating about Beck talking about the transition into a space of white male privilege is I've experienced almost the opposite in a move away from that space. And the same as you described, I have moments where I wonder if people are reacting to me as a trans woman, as a woman, or as something else. I have been recently described by someone outside of work in a social setting as exotic, and whilst my immediate reaction to that was it was flattering, I don't think it was intended to be flattering, or it was perhaps, and it was very misinformed. Coming back into the workplace, though, we are lucky in Accenture that we are a very diverse workforce, and we do talk about unconscious bias. It is absolutely still a thing that's there, and it's a thing that I need to check myself on as well. It's not just about gender or being transgender. I have been in general, I've been accepted as a woman by most of my colleagues, my client, my colleagues who I work with at my client. And that's been absolutely amazing and affirming. But at the same time, I was in an internal meeting recently where a technical discussion occurred. I'm going to change names. Where a technical discussion occurred, I got asked a question, and I work in an incredibly technical space. And I answered a question with a technical answer that explained, this is how it works, this is what it is, this is what we'll do. And someone in that call said, "That's great. Thanks, Sarah. Niall, what do you think?" And I have changed the names. And Niall immediately responded with, "Sarah's the expert here. Why would I say anything other than agree with what she's just told you?" And I think that's a powerful message about allyship as well. There are times I've had to correct people on pronouns. There are times that people have apologized when they've realized they've got my pronouns wrong before I'd noticed. And at the same time, there are times when we should all call out that kind of behavior, whether it's a trans woman or a cis woman or a person of color, it doesn't matter. We should all be calling out that kind of behavior in that way and making sure that it's recognized. The other thing I have noticed is I am incredibly aware that many of the calls and meetings, it's calls these days with COVID and remote working, but many of the calls that I'm in today, I was in the same kind of calls 12 months ago when I was still presenting as male. And at the time I didn't notice, but there were no women on the call. And now I'm on these same kind of calls with these same kind of people and these same kind of discussions, and I am the only woman on the call. And that's something else we can talk about and do to support gender diversity. And I think I'm probably moving beyond the transgender experience here and my own experience into that recognition that there is still unconscious bias, there is still that privilege out there, and we still need to work to address that.
Absolutely. Yes, I definitely think that the trans perspective and the trans experience can help us highlight, these are people who have lived both sides or of the kind of experience, or at least had more of a glimpse, and as much as possible to try to use those observations and those stories to advance gender equality for every person, transgender and cisgender, because really, if we take those steps forward, it's going to benefit us all. Doing those things like you pointed out and that Beck pointed out around speaking up when you notice that someone's being talked over or someone's being deferred to or not being deferred to based on their gender, and making sure that we correct those behaviors in the moment, just by making sure our own behavior doesn't mimic that. And, I would like to narrow it down a little bit now that we're going to go to Rika and AJ, specifically looking at your experience being hired, and then also what I know you both do a lot of advocacy work within Accenture around this part of hiring Accenture employees, supporting them when they're coming out. Rika, we'll start with you. Could you talk a little bit about what Accenture does in terms of hiring transgender people and supporting them when they're coming out and transitioning while an employee of Accenture?
Sure, James. I think it's very important to note that there are two main kind of like dimensions where we help transgender people in the company. One is on the financial and policy side, but the other one is on the culture in terms of support side that we provide to them. The policy side, we do have policies that protect and support transgender people, but at the same time, we do have in some countries, which we are slowly working, there is some financial support in terms of transgender health benefits that we have. There are some countries, I think in their national health system, there is already some form of support there, but Accenture, we do have some support that is offered as well in our. But I think that is still work in progress as we want to roll that out to several countries that we have. That's on the financial side. On the other side of that, which is a cultural in the support side, I think it's very important that we do there in terms of supporting these employees that we have. So that includes, for example, we have Transgender Checklist where we guide a person who is actually transitioning, what kind of things you need to do, who are the people you need to talk to, what are, for example, the name change, the people that you should notify online. Yeah, I mean that we do have that support as well. We also have the support group where you can basically, express yourself, and other transgender people, gender non-conforming, non-binary people around the world can give you support, give you guidance as well on how to go through the transition. And most importantly, I think the Pride Network that we have, we should always provide a safe environment for people to just be themselves, I think, and especially being aware of the different experiences and, for example, concerns of transgender people. Let's take, for example, name change. And for example, pronouns would be concerns of transgender people. So having to provide this environment of safety and support within the company as well is very important to support these transgender people. And I think we're slowly really getting more people who come out and really share their story, and they feel a story of support. They share their story of success and how it was incredibly easy and happy transition for them in the company. And I think that's something that we continue to work on.
Yeah, I completely agree. I definitely think we're making so much progress there. I mean, for me, I joined Accenture because of the trans benefits. When I wasn't even looking at consulting, and then I learned about how much we do support transgender colleagues, and I said, okay, I guess I'll try out consulting and see if I could do that. But even for people who are coming out within Accenture, like you said, there's so much support available. And if anybody on this call is wondering who to go to and, who are those names of who might be supportive, you could always reach out to me or any of the other panelists, and we could probably connect you to the right people in your given country, since they do vary by country. But wherever you're located, we could connect you with the right people to support you if you're looking for support. Now moving to highlighting really just the ways that we can continue supporting people who are trans, and especially young transgender people. But whether you are another trans person, or you're just part of the Pride Ally Network, or you're in the Pride Network, but you're not trans, but you're also not just an ally, you're a LGBTQIA, just skipping the T. No matter your positionality, how can you be a better ally? AJ, could we start with you? And I'd like to hear what you would think.
Yes, James, and Rika, thanks for that answer, because that succinctly summarizes what we're working towards in Accenture, both as a policy and a culture. So that transitions to the question that you asked, James. So I think your question, if I divide it as a transgender person, those are a member from the Pride and the Ally, and what we could do for the young generation, because I was so happy when Becca's joining as the managing director. There's not a lot of out and proud transgender people in managing director level in Accenture. And when I look back, I always wonder what's next and who's the next generation, because this cannot be a one-time thing. So, and I think I want to transition to answering your question as a transgender woman, and for everyone in this call as a transgender person. I think visibility is key. There are many times when people think that they don't have a role model. So I know, we seem to feel like it's exhausting and you feel like you're always representing, but it does matter, because the more we are out there, the more people can actually be more encouraged. And I also look at when I say the future generation, I'm very active at looking at non-government organizations or institutions. Like I just did a speech, or I was a panel for Start Proud, an organization here in Canada that looks at graduates from the LGBTQ plus community that are on STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I was so happy to see the future generation of all this, diverse people from all colors of the rainbow. So amazed of a neuroscience graduate who was out and vocal about her being pansexual. So out, a chemical engineer that she's bisexual, and all of these warms my heart because I can see the future generation. So a lot of that is a comeback to your visibility and the hard work that you're doing. For the Pride Network and the allies, and as you know, everyone, even in the Pride community, transgender is still like a so-so topic, right? And within our own community, we somehow have that friction. So I think I'll summarize it both for the ally and the Pride community. I think ally is a good word, and right now we're just talking about the word ally as if it doesn't mean anything, but there's an emphasis on an ally because you're taking on a cause of something that you're not even can't relate to. So for one, thank you for being an ally. What I want to encourage is be an active ally and be an active Pride member for the transgender community. And what does that mean, being active? So first, I think for me, it's a mindset change. Step one is a mindset change. And it happens to me too. And a lot of people in this call talk about unconscious bias. So do an internal check of your unconscious bias, be aware of it, and have like the courage to actually recognize it and that change is needed. So once you have that mentality, it's easier to be the external factors that you do as an ally. So be a good listener. Everyone have their story. We all learn from everyone's story, and no judgment when you're listening to someone. And I think lastly, being an active ally is, there were many times in my younger career where I think that I wanted to express something and I didn't have a voice, whether it's a circumstance, it's a position, or you're feeling like you can't really be as open as possible. So I encourage ally to be the voice of people that feel like they're voiceless. And maybe I close the answer with the young trans people. I'm encouraged by you. But what I want to suggest is your career will always be up and down. But as you start your career, have a voracious appetite to educate yourself, learn, get all the certifications, be as credible as possible. And I know many times I say this, focus, let your work speak for itself, because quality output and quality deliverable is genderless. And I look forward in the future to seeing new faces when we do another Transgender Day of Visibility. So it's something that I always focus on, and I'm just hopeful for the future. Thank you.
Thanks. Bailey, Beck, I would like to also hear your thoughts on this with allyship, but specifically we're getting a lot of questions from the chat about allyship within the workplace, such as like engaging with clients on unconscious bias, what to do when maybe there's a little bit inappropriate behavior, or when someone's being misgendered in the office, or there's any form of transphobia in the office. Could you speak to how to engage as an ally in those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I think, if you're noticing these kinds of behaviors or tensions, the most important part I want to put forth is take some sort of action. I think the exact action might depend on the context and your role relative to others, some positional or relational context. So, in some cases it may be appropriate for you to take someone aside one-on-one and say, hey, I noticed you are having trouble remembering, James's pronouns. Can I work with you on practicing that? That might not be appropriate with, say, a client, right? So the exact context does matter a little bit, but things that you can do include that kind of one-on-one friendly interaction, assuming the best intent, and really working to help the person overcome perhaps an obstacle that they don't realize they have. You know, it could involve, you know, in terms of work groups or managers or supervisors, you know, maybe you do need to involve the I&D team at Accenture or the HR team, all of whom will be supportive of trying to help everyone live into Accenture's values. And then with a client, you know, I think that's where you look to the team lead. And if you're not the team lead, you need to look to the team lead there and have a conversation with them about the behaviors and how it's affecting the team and the work, right? Because, you know, we talk about being supportive in the workplace, not only as, you know, the right thing to do, but also as really important to that work product and the ability for everyone to function to their absolute best and most innovative and most creative for Accenture. So we want to make sure we are having that kind of culture.
Thanks for those tips. That's really helpful, I think. Sarah, I think that you've talked about in the past on other calls some experiences maybe you've had handling these kind of situations or guiding people that you know in these situations of how to be an ally in the workplace. And another question in the chat that if you want to shed some light on is how to be an ally also when there's transphobia from within the LGBTQ community coming. So many facets of allyship, but would you like to give some pointers on how to act on any of them?
Sure, I'll have a go at that. I would like to add to Beck's answer as well, if I might, James.
Yes,
I've
absolutely.
just been through the process of coming out at my current client, and I have to say it's been an amazing experience. And I was nervous at the start, but I did reach out to the queer network at my client and talk to someone from that network about what I needed to do and what I needed to go through. And I think I was the first trans person there to come out at least and to change my name and identity there. And what we did in the end was our local Australian Pride network connected with the client Pride network, and we worked with the client to help them through that process of running transgender awareness training, of talking about all of these things. And it was all done while I took some leave, so that I came back to an environment where everyone had actually been prepped and trained to a degree and told, you know, what to expect, what was in, what was out, that kind of thing. So that's something else that we do as an organisation, and I hope that some of the people from my client are on the call, because I do want to tell you that it was absolutely amazing, positive experience. In terms of being an ally and dealing with transphobia, yeah, within our organisation, within the community, even within our LGBTQI community, at the end of the day, what we need to do is call out that behaviour, and we need to show each other support and I think unconditional love and respect each other's identities. And we can do that, and we can do both of those things. But the most important thing here is that we do respect all views, but we also recognise that sometimes that means while we'll have conflicting views, there doesn't have to be conflict in that. So in terms of being an ally in those situations, whether it's directed at me or at someone else, I'll make sure that I let that person know who it's directed at, know that they are supported, that they are cared for, and that's part of, for all of us as being visible and leaders, that's part of what one of the things we need to do. And the other part of that is rather than trying to punish someone who might be inadvertently transphobic, is to try and educate, because it's ultimately through that education that we change attitudes and opinions. through negative reactions to those things, we end up just reinforcing a situation. I did notice, I might just jump on another question from the chat. There's been quite a few questions around how can I support people when they're coming out? And I really want to answer this one. That's why I'm going to. The best thing you can do, the absolute best thing you can do is recognize that if a transgender person, gender diverse person is coming out to you, you may be the first person in the organization they're talking to about it. And that is such a privilege to have someone come out to you. Respect that person who's coming out to you, thank them, support them, thank them for their confidence in you, support them, and just accept them for who they are. Because that's the one thing, and that's the scariest thing for us on that first conversation, is that it's going to go badly, and we're going to find that this person we thought we could trust has reacted in a way that we weren't expecting. We're normally pretty good at picking that first person because we are observant, but please just show love and respect for anyone who does come out to you, and recognize that they're putting a massive amount of trust in you, and that's an incredible privilege for you as a person, and you will be able to help them on their journey.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, that's so much good insight, and absolutely just being there to support and realizing there are experts here to support you as you support other people. Number one takeaway probably to take away from today's call. And if you need help finding those experts, just ask one of us, because it can be hard work. Like if something happens, unpacking what's behind that thing that was said. We do get infused a lot of transphobic messages through our lives. So people come to believe things that aren't really a lot of times true, but inform their behavior. So it's important to unpack that, or if you need resources, these can be hard and require some expertise, but we do have the people you need to support you here. I want to give everybody a chance to do a closing message, and also to answer any question that wasn't kicked over to you, but that you were sitting there going, oh, I really wish I had a chance to answer that question. So we're going to do a roundtable now, and we'll start with Rika.
Yes, I think we had a really lovely conversation around people who we expect as allies, and I would like to actually leave a message to we should level up our definition of allies. We should be agents or accomplices of change. We should do an active role to educate people around us, our clients, and really just be supportive of transgender people. And like what Sarah said, being approached for someone who is transitioning or coming out is such an honor. It means that you got the person's trust and you are an agent of change. Yeah.
Thanks, Rika. Let's go to Beck next.
So I'll leave you with a couple of frightening statistics and a really positive one. Research here in the United States shows that for transgender youth, they are 3 times as likely to consider suicide attempts and 5 times as likely to actually attempt suicide. But the good news is that 40% less likely to report that suicide attempt if they have the support of one adult in their life. Be that one adult. Find a way to be an openly supportive adult in the lives of LGBTQ youth, and you will be doing life-saving work.
I don't know what a more powerful message we could have ended on there. Thank you, Beck, so much. AJ, would you like to do your message?
Yeah, so I think number one, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and thank you to the panelists. I think we have a good start. We're starting to change. There are still more to come. There's still a lot to do. And I think let's go through this journey together. And while we're going through that journey, let's all look at it with kindness and compassion. And we're all going to be better together. Thank you.
Thanks, AJ. And Sarah, would you like to close this out?
Thank you, James. I'd like to share something that my fairy trans mother told me a few months ago. Yeah, we all get to have a fairy trans mother. And she told me that once you come out as transgender, or in fact probably as an LGBTIQ person, once you come out, it's not over. It's the beginning of a journey, and as you move through your life and as you move throughout the journey, you will be coming out again and again and again, and people are going to want to know your story again and again and again. And please just be patient with us, because sometimes we're not ready to share. But more importantly, please recognize that we do need to come out again and again and again. And sometimes what might seem like frustration or dismissal from us is actually just a bad day.
Definitely understand that. Lots of so remembering allyship, compassion, to be that one adult in a trans youth life. These are all some important takeaway messages from today. Thank you everybody for joining, and we hope that you will take the stuff you learned and go be an advocate for the trans community as you move forward. Thank you.